Hello. Hello, hello. Excited to be here. Excited to have our first weekly live stream. Last week we did our launch live stream, and now we get into the exciting content. So we are thrilled to talk to you about profit, all
That's
things
right.
profit.
That's right. It's time to get down to the good stuff.
So first, before we dive in, we'll explain what these live streams are. These are weekly live streams every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central that we're going to dive into more of the nitty gritty when it comes to business finance, profit, all of that good stuff. If you have a topic you're interested in hearing about, please post in the Facebook group. We would love to customize our agenda for you and get the most value for you. But we also have some topics that we want to cover. So today is all about the fundamentals of profit. Like, why is profit important? How do you look at profit? What are the contributing factors to it? All of that fun stuff we're going to dive in today. Are you excited, Colin?
Hey, you know me. I wake up thinking about this stuff. So yeah. No, it's exciting. And like you said, we got a couple really good questions in the Facebook group. I just want to point out a couple of them fit really nicely with today's topic. So we're gonna be able to touch on those. And this is what we work on every day. So yeah, I'm always ready to talk about how to get more profit.
Yeah. So if that sounds good to you, let us know. Give us a thumbs up and we will dive right in. Let's talk first about why profit is important. I know this, like Colin said, he's very passionate about it.
Oh
But
my gosh.
why does it
I,
matter?
I've had to be. Okay. So, as as you've heard a little bit about, Rachel, when I started my first business, and some of the people in the group may have already heard this, but when I started in my very first business, I came in, I was 21, 22 years old, had no idea, didn't know anything about business finance, didn't know anything about small business. And, the minute I got involved, I kind of gravitated toward the finance side of the business. And it was a mess. I mean, train wreck would be like a compliment. Okay. Just to share. I mean, we had, as an example, we didn't have enough money in the bank to make payroll. We had vendor bills we could not afford to pay. Vendors were already talking about cutting us off. Most of our accounts receivable, most of our customer money, we couldn't actually collect. They were basically saying no until you have this done and this done, or just ghosting us, or whatever the situation was. The bulk of our inventory was things that we had bought for a project that got canceled before we ever delivered it. We never got paid for it. So the vast majority of our inventory was things that we couldn't actually sell because it was a highly custom industry. And so, when I got in, I didn't know what the right way to do anything was. But I knew everywhere I turned, I'm like, well, that's not it. And that's not it. And that can't be it, because that's going to kill us. So, it was right out of the gate. And that was just kind of my entrepreneurial journey, was right out of the gate, like sleepless nights, freaking out. What if we don't get this? Customer said they're finally going to pay us. If we don't get that, we can't make payroll. Now what? I mean, we were using credit cards like a line of credit. I mean, I could go on and on, Rachel. It's unbelievable how many things we had that were messed up.
Sounds like your
And
stress
so
level would have been through the roof.
you can't even really explain it. I mean, it's for anybody who's been there, I get it. And, the amazing part is, and I think this is kind of what's cool about small business, once you get some things figured out and you turn the corner on that story, it feels like a superpower that you were able to overcome that, right? It feels like a different level of strength that you now have that you can call upon that you never had before. And so for me, it really came from, okay, I couldn't fix all those things at once. In fact, I couldn't fix 95% of them within the first quarter or the first year, some of them. What I had to do was I had to figure out, what is the thing I can control today that if we start making progress on this, we will eventually overcome most, if not all, of those challenges. And the answer was profit. The simple answer was, a lot of our challenges with the lack of cash and some of the things that were going wrong were because we were not a profitable company. And when I look at it, it was a very volatile type of company. And again, we'll kind of talk about this over time, of different types of revenue streams and different challenges companies face related to that. But for us, I started fixing, like I always say, the micro things I fixed eventually became the macro picture, meaning I had to fix every quote, every order. We had to start figuring out how we were going to build that path to profit. And to the extent we fixed that, we fixed the whole company. And over time, the team knew how to make money, and the company learned how to be profitable. And it went beyond just like one person or one, lucky break, which I feel like sometimes in the past, if we had a period where we made money, it almost felt like luck. It didn't feel like we were good. It felt like, okay, everything worked out this time, like cross our fingers for the next one.
Mm-hmm. Like, when are we going to turn the other corner again?
Yeah, exactly. Because we didn't really have a plan, and we didn't have now we talk about the profit playbook, right? And, that was the biggest thing though, was really just learning about the business and what was working and what wasn't from a profitability standpoint. Once I fixed that, then we just kind of lined up the other dominoes, and we had to say, okay, we're going to have to solve this problem as we come to it. But if we have this economic engine that's now working, we're now making money, we can start to overcome almost all of those. And so it's just a matter of time.
Yeah. Oh, man, I don't envy that situation that you inherited. But hey, I mean, you're in a much better spot now, and you've learned so much from that experience. I know you own a couple of other businesses, and really driving that profit has been key for you over time.
Yeah, it has. And like I said, I mean, it's not the only thing in finance, not the only thing that I like to focus on, or that we've had to, only challenge you've had to overcome. But I would say it's the number one core. And I always joke, like, I've never met a business owner who doesn't want more profit than what they've done, whether that's profit for themselves, for their team, for, their community, whatever they want to do with that. There's never like hey, I'm good, please stop the profit from coming. And, we know, like, profit's a discipline. It is not like, well, if you had the right plan and you just check these boxes, it takes care of itself. It's something you have to really build the discipline, and over time you have to execute over and over and over again to get better. And as the market changes, as your products change, as the new challenges come, you have to continue to adapt and grow beyond that.
Mm-hmm. What would you say to businesses that, I know we have a broad spectrum of different types of businesses in this group, but ones that are like, I'm not profitable right now. I know that. I have no idea how to get out of this hole.
Yeah. So that's great. One of my favorite sayings that I learned many years later was, what do you do when you find yourself in a hole? And the number one thing is stop digging. Right. And so in other words, like, quit making your hole worse. That's the first thing. Before you worry about how I'm going to, fill in this hole, how I'm going to overcome this hole that I've created, you can't obsess over that. You have to know that, okay, I am done digging deeper into this hole. And I feel like that was that turning point that, we had as a company early on. Was I said, hey, I don't know how to solve all these other challenges, but I believe fundamentally, if we can stop digging this hole deeper and deeper, then eventually we will climb out of it. And I always describe those phases of the turnaround where really, like, stopping digging was phase one. Then a next phase was, okay, filling in the hole. In other words, getting back to level to where, like, things aren't good, but they're no longer terrible. Okay. We don't have a lot of money in the bank. We don't have a lot of good inventory yet. We don't have a ton of accounts receivable that are turning quickly and people are paying us, but we're level. We're okay. We've met the minimum level of kind of safety. And so, and then it was building above and beyond that was a whole nother phase. So that's the way I like to look at it.
Yeah. Oh, that's so powerful, because it can feel really overwhelming to be like, I'm not making money. I'm losing money right now. How do I get to whatever percent profit I feel like I should be at? Just stop making it worse. It's a great first step.
Yeah. And again, I know that's overwhelming of how to do that. We'll talk about some of that today. I mean, it's not the beauty and part of what I love. I gravitated toward the math side of business, but the math within business, 99.99 carry the 9% of math within business is addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. This is not, we're not doing calculus. It's not trig. Like, everybody relax. It's really not that hard. It's just about understanding the basics.
Yeah. And then, so the other scenario that we see all the time is, okay, maybe you're not in the red, you're in the black, but you're making, I don't know, 2, 3% profit. Like, well, I mean, I'm not losing money. That's
Yep.
good enough, right? What would you say to them?
Well, I mean, I think, there's a great book called Profit First that, I'm a big believer in. And it basically talks about the concept of, hey, 10% is real breaking even. When you're quote breaking even and you're talking about I'm at 0, 1, 2%, I'm somewhere in that realm, that is so dangerous because we all know that the way real life happens, right? Happens not just in our business, but in any walk of life. When you're kind of your most exposed, that's when the big scary things happen. And, that's essentially you're leaving yourself knowingly in a position where one blip, one bump in the road could be the thing that takes you down. And it's only when you hit that, let's call it 10% profitability and sustain it over a long period of time. That's when you're out of that danger zone. That's when you can relax a little bit and say, hey, a blip might take me down to 5%, but it's not taking me from 0 to -5. And you may not have the cash to survive -5. You may not have a bank willing to go along for the ride at the -5, right? You get into all kinds of hairy problems when you get into that negative. And so that's a really, really significant part of, having a business that maintains at least a minimum level of profitability forever.
Yeah. It really speaks to that, the safety and security of your business. Not only for you, you are supporting a whole bunch of people with your business. You're supporting your clients, you're supporting employees. And so to know that you have a sustainable business, that if you hit a bump in the road, you're fine, makes a big difference to everyone that your business touches.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, to me, part of what I love about small business is that it's a little more raw. Like you're in the mix of like what's happening. You can go work for a big company. You're very insulated from some of the big things that are going on. You're also though insulated from a lot of the decision making. So you can just wake up one day and find out that, some spreadsheet someone was using to eliminate jobs, your row got picked and that's it. You don't get a conversation about it. You didn't get to be part of the strategy. You didn't get to think through it. So part of what I love about small business is that you really are a little closer to the action. But to your point, that creates a profound pressure. That creates a profound, responsibility that you have. And, the minute I started worrying about the finances of my company in my first company, I was not an owner at the time. I later bought that company. I immediately stopped worrying about my own paycheck and started worrying about everyone's paychecks. And that was this mindset shift. And I think a lot of business owners, if we've made that mindset shift, which I've yet to meet business owners who don't take that responsibility really to heart. And the scary thing is, the challenge is that some business owners are living in this kind of ongoing nightmare where they've made that shift of mindset around the responsibility and they don't know how to fix their problem yet. And so it just weighs on them 7 days a week, on Christmas Day, on whatever holiday that you celebrate. And that's a really scary and trying life to try and lead.
If you're in that situation right now, just stop for a minute and think, what would it be like if you didn't have that? Were you like,
Yeah.
I'm regularly making 15, 20% profit. I know that we're covered if we hit a bump in the road. I'm not lying awake at 3 a.m. on Christmas Eve. Like, how am I going to make payroll? Can you imagine the difference in your life and probably your employees' lives if that was true?
I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to your point, like that's massive. I mean, you can't overstate the impact on a human being's life of that difference in confidence, in comfort. And again, I don't really hang out with entrepreneurs or know many entrepreneurs who care about flashy stuff. It's not about like, I'm going to get rich so I can drive one of these exotic cars. It's like, I want to know that I've got money in the bank and that we're going to do okay next month and that all my employees' jobs are safe and that, my kids are going to be able to go to college like, my cousin who's got a W-2 job does, that's important. That's a really important thing in people's lives.
Mm-hmm. The other really great thing about having profit is it allows you to reinvest. and innovate in your company. If you want to grow sustainably, profit is how you do that.
Yep, absolutely. And to your point, for most businesses, that's where I talked about digging out of that hole, getting back to level, and then ultimately, starting to go beyond level. It's that beyond level that unlocks what you're describing of being able to reinvest within your company, within your team, I remember one of the proudest moments of my life was the first time we were able to make a charitable donation out of my company. The same company that couldn't pay its bills, the same company that sold well into the six figures of inventory for pennies on the dollar. Pennies. Maybe less than a penny. It was insulting how little we got. We literally sold them for scrap metal. And so the same company who had to overcome all of that then actually brought a handful of charities in, and we sat the employees around a conference table and said, hey, at 11 o'clock, this one's coming. At 1 o'clock, this one's coming. And we're going to talk to them about what they do with this money. And the employees are going to vote on who we donate to. And that was like so meaningful from the story of where we've been. And so that's what drives me, is the passion to have other companies have that.
Yeah. Oh, that's amazing. I hadn't heard that story before.
Yeah.
It just gives you options to do with that money what you want to. If you want to reinvest it in your company, great. If you want to take home a higher paycheck, great. If you want to spread the wealth among your employees or among your community, you have those options if you've got that foundation of profit.
Exactly.
Well, how do we go about this profit situation? So the next question we've got, and the next topic, deep dive for you, is what we call the profitability formula. Like, okay, profit is great. I think everyone agrees profit is good. But how do you calculate it? How do you know, okay, I'm not getting profit. What do I do? Where's my next step? And so we've got some very simple visuals for you that I will pull up if Colin wants to introduce the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, yeah, you can go ahead and pull it up now, would be fine. I think the first thing to remember is, what are the majority of entrepreneurs going through? Like, what are we doing? The majority of entrepreneurs are, looking at whatever QuickBooks prints for them, looking at their P&L, and whether in QuickBooks or Xero or one of the other softwares. And they basically just hit, print or show it on the screen and, go ahead and pull it up. This is what it looks like when you see it. And there's a lot going on there, right? And so it's very overwhelming. If I'm looking, this is the proverbial like needle in a haystack. I see all of this. That's cool. But what happens is I start looking, I go, revenue. Okay. Does that kind of sound about what I expect? Okay. Look at the next one. It's, cost of goods sold and gross margin. Are those kind of where I expect to be? And then I just get lost in a sea of stuff. And I'm like, what does that mean? And why is that there? And shouldn't that be over here? And I'm looking at big numbers and little numbers, and it's a mess. And the reality is, and this was a huge mindset shift for me, and this is what I want to encourage. I encourage every small business person. You should be able to explain how your company makes money on the back of a napkin. And I always say this. You picture yourself, you're at a hotel bar or whatever, and you're sitting there having a conversation with somebody. You should be able to pull a literal napkin out and with your pen, scratch down 5 or 6 lines and say, this is how we make money. And when this happens, we make more money. When this happens, we make less money. And the problem with this form of a profit and loss is like, good luck. Because you're just, wait a minute, employee taxes, I thought those should be somewhere else. And wait, is this employer taxes? What is this line? I'm like, this doesn't make sense. And so you just get absolutely, lost in that amount of details. And so from that, once I started understanding my business that well, I created what I've always called the simple profit formula, which has a similar, it has all the same information, but it's formatted for my simple math brain to be able to be like, okay, I get it. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, so as you're pulling up here, the very first thing is revenue, right? Not complicated. So as we're looking at the simple profit formula, and we'll kind of talk about, using it in terms of a projection, but it's important to know, you should be able to do this historically. You should be able to look at, what happened in 2023 when you did this. You should be able to kind of do like, okay, here's my goals and the way I've set up for 2024. You should be able to do that. So the revenue number you should plug in based on which of those scenarios that you're looking at. And then everything else you're going to look at as we pull them up here, you should be looking at in terms of a percentage of that revenue. And so I always like, if I'm doing a really simple business, we just say $1 million because it's the simplest, number that everyone can see very quickly what the numbers would do in terms of percentage. But you should obviously plug this in your revenue for 2023 or what you're expecting for 2024.
Yeah. So revenue, money coming in, and then you start taking away these other categories. First.
Exactly. Yeah. And so cost of goods sold. So some companies have cost of goods sold, some don't. If we're talking about a company that's purely, that's doing like manufacturing, you obviously have raw materials and cost of goods sold. If you're a distributor reselling a product, you obviously have these cost of goods sold. But some companies, just to be clear, if you're running a services company and you basically just are essentially selling some format of your people's time, you may not have this. But one thing I would encourage is if you have, this is cost directly associated with the revenue that you're bringing in. And so what you're really looking at here is kind of outside costs. If that's, to vendors, or some people use, to provide their services, they're using contractors. These are people who are not your employees, but you're spending and you're having to write those checks. And we'll kind of get into here in a minute between fixed and variable and why it's so important that we understand that difference. But typically your cost of goods sold are going to be variable. They're going to follow your revenue very, very closely.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Next on the list, sales and marketing.
Yeah. So sales and marketing. We had a couple of questions in the Facebook group. And so we're going to talk about that. Sales and marketing. Again, one of the things that I want to focus on here is we're looking at all of these as a percentage of revenue. So you should know on the back of your napkin, do I spend 3% on sales and marketing? Do I spend 5% on sales and marketing? Do I spend 15%? You should know that. And you should know whether you intend for that to follow revenue. Okay. So in other words, one of the big things around budgeting is I should know which of these things are going to follow revenue and which of these things are kind of fixed. And I like to think of sales and marketing as variable, that it follows revenue. And as I invest in it, I should see a return on that investment, and that should be reflected in the revenue as it grows.
Yeah, it might be a little bit delayed. So you might spend more on sales and marketing and then see the revenue come in a little down the line, but it should still follow.
Correct. And again, today's purpose is not for us to deep dive into each one of these different areas. We could go on for 2 hours about sales and marketing. But to your point, one of the things, there is a little bit of a delay, but there should be a return on investment. And what I want everybody to think about is the return on investment in your business is not just bottom line profit. And then like, what did you put in? What was your investment in time or investment in, whatever your assets or what you contributed to the business? Think about each of these areas should have an ROI related to the revenue. And so cost of goods are really easy to see. It usually has a pretty fixed return on investment. If it's, if I'm spending 20% on my product, it has a kind of a 5-to-1 ROI related to revenue. And thinking about each of these things in that way kind of enlightens you as to what you're actually spending your money on.
Mm-hmm. All right. The third category of spending is labor. This is a big one.
Yeah, absolutely. And most companies, so I've got companies that we have people who are hourly. I would say other companies are predominantly salary. One thing that I'll state though, is that it's easy. And I like to look at all of these. Again, I said at the beginning, looking at these as a percentage of revenue. Okay. But generally speaking, there's kind of a minimum fixed cost you have associated with your labor, because I don't have hourly employees. Like if I just cut them down to however many hours I actually need them and just, hey, sorry guys, this week you get 10 hours. I'm not going to have employees for very long. So one of the big challenges that we run into and that we hear a lot about is, this notion of like, well, I can't, that's really kind of a fixed cost. I can't just cut it down. And so when my revenue goes down for the week or for the month, my labor costs look really high as a percentage. And you're right. That's exactly what I want people to see. Each of these levers has some different ways that you pull it and some different ways to look at it. But on the back of a napkin, I want you to be able to say, okay, this one's fixed. This one's variable. This is how much revenue we're expecting to do. And with that information, you can start to take it where we're going to take it here in a few minutes, which is to look forward instead of just backward.
And then last, when you take revenue and you minus all the other categories, you get overhead. That's what's left over.
Yes. And that's the way I like to do it. So a lot of times, people will see like, okay, well, my CPA set up my financials and it's got 100 different categories and they're in all this different order. I mean, one of the craziest things is a lot of CPAs they think advertising because it starts with an A and that's up high. And then it's like personnel or whatever. Oh, well, that's down here. For me, I like, my financials to basically mirror this format, but regardless of what order yours are in, to your point, if I take my revenue and I subtract my cost of goods, which I should have a definitive answer for what all those are, subtract my sales and marketing, which I should know which of these areas, which of these different lines on my P&L are in the sales and marketing category. Same thing for labor. When I subtract all of that, whatever's left over, it might be your lease on a car. It might be the rent. It might be utilities. It might be et cetera, travel to a conference, whatever it is, you need to think about which of these categories does each line belong in, and kind of the catch-all junk drawer is overhead.
Mm-hmm.
And typically for companies, it's the most fixed. It's the most it's very repetitive. I might have like, oh, well, I had to give, I gave bonuses this month, so labor spikes, but overhead for the most part is pretty streamlined and pretty standard.
Yep. And then what's left over is profit,
which is the best.
Which we're all after.
That's my favorite. Yeah, favorite line.
All right, we've got a couple of other notes to touch on with this profit formula, but honestly, this is as simple as it is. Like Colin said, it should be able to write it on the back of a napkin. So it's, six different things. That's it. Much easier to understand than the 3-page P&L.
Yes, exactly. 3-page P&L with big numbers, small numbers, and everything's nested and these things flow into here, but then I have to remember to go down here and grab something else. It's like, get all of your P&L to where you understand which of these, really it's 5 before profit, which is just the sum, the positive or negative that you end up with. And get it to where you understand your P&L that way. And it's amazing for your awareness of the business.
Yeah. Can you imagine only looking at 5, maybe 6 numbers instead of the 100.
Yeah. and to your, to that point, so we'll talk about here in a minute about, kind of forecasting and what to do once you have this understanding. But to your point, one of the most profound parts about it is I don't go get lost in the P&L because the P&L has all these numbers that are like 100. And, one of the ones that drives me the craziest is you'll have like, here's my labor kind of main header G&L code. And it'll have a value on it. And it should just be a master category that has a bunch of things underneath it. And you're like, why does it say $112 there? And then you just go on this like horrible rabbit hole trying to figure this out, or it drives you crazy. You start to lose confidence in the overall financials. Get them in this format. And once you know what the percentages should be, once you know your fixed costs of labor and overhead, like every month I've got overhead of $10,000 and I've got labor of 30. Once you start to know with confidence what those things should be, the minute one of them's off, you go laser focus right to it. You no longer get lost in all this other nonsense that honestly, the $112 makes no difference whatsoever on your business. But if labor, which should be, is $30K a month, and normally that's 50% of your total revenue, and it's 75, bingo, you've got a big problem you need to look at.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that I love about this profit formula is that it helps you as a business owner make better decisions faster. So you're not getting bogged down in all the details. That's, something that we care a lot about at FinElevate is how do we make your finances in a way that you can understand them and that you can easily see that's something I need to do something about, and I'm going to make a decision on that.
Yeah, I love that. And you're absolutely right. So that's the whole point, right? The more you understand what has happened and what could happen, the more you start to get into the scenarios and the what ifs and really understanding the future.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's remind ourselves what else we wanted to talk about here. We get so excited about this. We could.
So we talked about variable versus fixed, and I would argue that you treat the first 2 elements of cost as variable. Sales and marketing, you may say, hey, I haven't really done a whole lot of sales and marketing. I would take a look at historical. And one of the questions we'll address is about, understanding the impact of sales and marketing and budgeting. Look at it as variable. Look at it as this is a fixed percentage kind of, that I need to pay to continue growing a healthy top line of my company. And so whether that's historically 1%, 3%, 10%, whatever that number is, figure out what the answer should be. And then let's kind of lock it in that way. And so that way your cost of goods and sales and marketing are variable. Labor and overhead are fixed.
Yep. Next.
Yeah. So I call it a profit standard. Okay. In other words, I don't want it to be a budget. It's not a forecast. It is a standard, just like if I'm talking to my kids about what my expectations are. I talk about, hey, these are the standards that we have. This is kind of the bare minimum of acceptable, right? And you are in control of your financials. You are in control of your company. You should have standards. And one of the things that I love is kind of a Tony Robbins thing. He said, it is time to raise those standards, right? And it's this idea of always having a higher expectation for yourself and for your company. So what I like to do is I look at across industries, and this is one of the biggest cop-outs I see, and I see it over and over again, and somebody's going to watch this and they're going to go, wait a minute, Colin's picking on me. Do not take some industry average that some expert told you and said, hey, well, your business is probably only going to ever do between 6 and 12% or 10 and 15%. Do not take that as if you are in the bottom end of your range, that is somehow acceptable performance. Industries involve giant companies, mid-sized companies, and small companies. And the vast majority of the ones that we work with are smaller companies. You need to be a premium provider. You need to have premium levels of profit, because you cannot just, giant grocery stores, casinos, these companies grind out small single digits of profit, but it's because they do such a mass volume of revenue. If you're doing 1 million in revenue, 10 million in revenue, 15 million in revenue, anywhere in that 20 million and below, you cannot get caught in this I just grind out this small number, because in truth, your total revenue volume does not justify that mindset. And so you just have to find out what that standard is. There are some industries that make 20, 30, 35% profit. Whatever the biggest end of the range of anywhere you can find, I want that to be your standard.
That's important. I'm going to say it again because it's a really important point. If you're looking at industry standards and they have a range, your goal should be the top end of the range, not the bottom end.
Absolutely. All day long. And I will prove to you, and this is what we'll talk about here in a second, but I can prove to you mathematically how you can accomplish that. It's really not that hard. And I love that idea that someone said where, hey, everything in the world is created twice, first in someone's mind and then in reality. You need to shift your mind. If someone has told you 8% is acceptable, 8% is not acceptable. 12 to 15% for every business anywhere I've ever run into. If it is not a 12 to 15%, number one, I think you've bought the wrong, you're drinking the wrong Kool-Aid. Number two, you just need to get out of that business if that's absolutely true. I don't believe that to be true. But if you believe it to be true and you can't shift your mind around it, then go find a business that you believe it is true. But I think it really comes down to that mindset shift of saying good is not good enough. Because if I just say, hey, we did 6%, does that make you feel warm and fuzzy that you're protected? That 94% of every dollar that came in went out? Does that make you feel like that's safe, secure? Does that feel good for your family? Does that feel good for your team? I highly doubt it. So stop accepting it as if there's nothing you can do about it.
Man, we're getting deep now. This speaks to larger values of changing the things that you can control and seeing that you can control profit.
Yes. And it begins with that mindset. Everything begins with that mindset shift.
That's good. That's deep. What was the last one? What if scenarios?
Yeah, we'll talk about it here in a second. Built a simple spreadsheet to basically do some what if scenarios. And again, once I understand these 5 levers that ultimately control my profit number, I can start to say, like, what if revenue went down by 20%? What if, revenue doubled? What would that mean? And I see which numbers are going to follow revenue up and which ones are going to stay fixed. And one of the ways this is great is we hear a lot, what can I afford one more employee? Or can I afford to spend this much more on marketing?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times the answer comes down to, let's do the back of the napkin math and let's figure out, if you spent this additional amount in marketing, here's how much return you'd have to make more money than you made without it. It's really simple. Yes, we ultimately want to make more of a return on investment, but it gives you a baseline, like, this is a do not cross line below which I would have been better off not to spend that money.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of, we've got a little tool for you if you stuck around, and that is our really simple profit formula. There, we'll go into the actual live version of this in a minute, but we want to explain the fundamentals of it and why it's important first.
Yeah, again, I built this to be as simple as humanly possible. It really just shows, with numbers and percentages, the example of the simple profit formula we talked about. Everything on the left-hand column, revenue, cost of goods, sales, team/labor, overhead, those are the 5 levers. And so the basics of the formula is, everything is, if we input a new percentage, the way we're going to show this, if we input a new percentage on the cost of goods or sales and marketing, which we said are variable, then the amount will change. And if we input a new amount on team and labor or overhead, then the percentage on the right where it says fixed will change. And that allows us to say, like, what if revenue went up this percent? What if revenue, doubled? What if I hired a new person and my labor went from 600 to 650,000? Whatever those amounts and changes are, we want to be able to kind of create a really simple back of the napkin, kind of down and dirty way to say, here's what the bottom line impact would be of those changes. And one of the things I want to point out is that because we're about to show the other half of this slide, but here's a little quiz when we're talking about the mindset. Okay. If I were to tell you, in this scenario you see on the left, where we're making 1% bottom line profit, we're making $10,000 on $1 million in sales, in revenue. If I were to say, what if we were to go up only 10% in revenue? What would be the bottom line impact? And again, knowing the cost of goods is going to go up because it's going to mirror that extra 10%. Sales and marketing is going to mirror that extra 10%, but my labor and my overhead are going to stay the same. What would be the impact on the bottom line? And this is what we really built the tool for, because I don't think our human brains are quite equipped to do this, to understand like that true profound impact. So if you go up 10% in revenue,
what do you think it
if
is?
you thought it's 10% more profit, or you thought it's 20 or 50 or 100% more profit, this is going to blow your mind.
Ready?
Go ahead and click it. If you add 10% in additional revenue and your variable costs go up, it adds 700% to your bottom line. Your bottom line goes from 10 grand to $81,000 by simply adding 10% more to the top line. And so once your brain clicks around this simple profit formula and you go, wait a minute, wow, like, this is what I can do with this information, you realize, like, if you could spend, and you'll see, cost of goods are going to just follow revenue. But if I could spend $9,000 in additional sales and marketing and get $100,000 in additional revenue, and maybe that's your team hustling a little more, maybe that's, we know how sales and marketing go. It's a blend of small, very effective but inexpensive measures, and then a few bigger spend measures. If we can spend $9,000 and generate $100,000 in extra revenue, the profit impact, even after paying for that 9,000, is 710% higher.
It's wild. I remember the first time you showed me this and my brain was blown. How on earth does it work that quickly to add money to the bottom line? But it really is. If the majority of your expenses, usually for most businesses, are in team and labor, and that's for the most part fixed. If you grow a whole bunch, you might be adding people. But if you're adding 10% of revenue, you're probably not adding a person at that point. And so if that's fixed, your overhead is fixed, and the cost of goods and sales and marketing are only going up in a percentage, that just all of that extra revenue goes down to the bottom line.
Exactly.
It's wild.
And what I love about that, the minute I show this to people and the minute they learn to use a simple profit formula and think about it in this way, is the minute they say, okay, well, I'm locking in my fixed, my team and labor and my overhead. I'm locking them in and I'm going to see how high I can get revenue without having to change those at all. Because then now you realize the real game here. And likewise, wait a minute, if I can spend an extra 9,000 in revenue or in sales and marketing cost and generate this additional revenue, like it's a no-brainer. And the other thing that I love when we're looking at it in this format, I want people to remember, like, you are making 1%, let's say, and this feels hopeless. This feels almost insurmountable. This feels like I've just been waking up and living this nightmare over and over again. And I know I should be making 15%, but I'm making 1. You are so close. You know, it's amazing when you look at it in this way. It really opens your mind to the reality that you're not miles and miles away. You've gotten right to the precipice. The next few steps, the next measure of growth unlocks for a lot of people their dreams. And so it's like getting your mind right around that changes your approach to everything in the way you see your business.
Yeah, we actually just had a client go through a similar situation to this. And it was so nice to see where they really reinforced what their spending levels should be for all of these costs. And then now have started to really amp up revenue. And that just went almost all to the bottom line. It was so exciting.
I know. And if we do it as a percentage, it's going to be equally as, jaw dropping as what you're seeing here, right? Because they were living right at that precipice moment where it was like, oh my gosh, well, great year. We do, 6% or 10% or a great month or quarter or whatever it is. And then, oh my gosh, we feel like we're always in the danger zone. One blip and all of a sudden we've dipped too low. And so taking that and now adding that extra level of volume with that mindset of like, dig in your heels on all the fixed costs and invest in sales and marketing. It's like unbelievable how much. And the crazy part is as you go, and the reason why I like this in an Excel tool is because adding another 10% to that revenue has almost an equally jaw-dropping impact, right? You instantly go from 1% to 7% to whatever it is, 16%.
I'm going to stop sharing and open up the Excel version so that we can see that.
Yeah, it's staggering. And so that's what I love is once people play around with a tool like this, whether you build your own or whether you use ours, once you're using this and you're seeing this, yeah, you're going to have to zoom way in because I can't see you. But once you start playing with a tool like this, it's really mind-blowing. And one of the best things I love about it is it just opens your eyes to what's possible. You stop with all the excuses you've been living through, and you stop with the kind of defeat of like, oh my gosh, another month, another quarter, another year, I'm still stuck at this same spot. Yeah. And you go, oh my gosh, whatever it takes, I'm going to push through to that next level. And when I get there, it's going to be life-changing. Yeah. And again, we'll kind of talk about, but one of the things we'll talk about in future live streams and a lot is once I can engage a team in this thought process, it is equally life-changing. So in other words, getting out of just saying, hey, this is what, I have to, like, this is mine to bear. I'm the only one who's focused on this. Once you do some other things we can talk about to get the team engaged in winning this game in a format they can understand. I mean, it's unbelievable the impact it has on you.
Yeah, let's look at and I'm sorry, I can't figure out my Zoom is grayed out, so I can't zoom in, but I'll tell you the numbers verbally. So if a 10% increase in revenue is 710% increase in profit, which is still wild to me.
Yep.
A 20% increase in revenue is 1,420% increase in profit. You go from $10,000 in profit to $152,000 in profit. It's just, our brains aren't meant to comprehend this without a tool that tells us.
Not at all. And so one of the questions we got, so I'm going to tie in a question we got in the Facebook group, which I love. Thank you for everyone who had questions. One of the ones I want to spend a minute on is, we had the question about justifying or how do you budget for additional sales and marketing? Well, if you've gotten this far in the video, number one, do it on a percentage basis. Look at it as variable. So when I have a target for where I need to be in terms of revenue, where I expect to be, generally that's going to be based on my historical, what I've done previously in terms of revenue. And we can talk forecasting is probably another conversation. Mm-hmm. But once you have that and you start to look at that percent, what you can do with a tool like this is, let's just say that you believed with, just increasing your existing marketing spend that's at 9% right now, that you could do now you've spent an additional 18,000 over a year, and you've gone from 1 million to 1.2 million. So you've increased 20% in revenue. Now you now know, because we've talked about it, everyone who's watching this, you're going to be obsessed with your fixed. You're going to be willing to spend a little more on your sales and marketing, at least track it as a percentage. But what I think where it gets really exciting is, let's see here first, what would happen if you spent 15% your sales and marketing, but it went, right now we're at $152,000 in profit. Okay. If you put this at 15, we're going to see that number temporarily go down because we haven't added more revenue. But what if, you got to put negative 15%.
Oh, yep. All right.
Like, this is the best business that's ever existed. So negative 15%. Now you're locked in, you're only 7%. But so your worst case scenario, let's just say that you're able to grow to 1.2 million. And you did, your spending it doubled. It went from 90,000 to 180,000 in sales and marketing. You still are up 700% in terms of your total profit. You've gone from 10,000 to 80,000, right? But where it gets really exciting to me is, now what if we went up to, let's say, 1.4 million based on this $180,000 of money that we're spending in sales and marketing?
Ooh.
You're now up, even including the additional spend. Okay. Notice that number went higher because as I raised revenue, I not only changed from 9% to 15% of sales and marketing spend, but it followed that revenue up. We're now spending $210,000 in sales and marketing. But to get to that 1.4 million, I now have put 210,000 on the bottom line. I'm at 15% profit. I am up 2,000% versus the historical on the left. Mm-hmm. And so again, what I will tell you, and my recommendation, going back to the question, my recommendation is, number one, I need to know what my sales and marketing is as a percentage of revenue. Number two, once I have that baseline, I'm going to go to my sales and marketing people. And it's like, hey, I may have additional budget that I can spend, but I want a return. And this is how I will validate that return is real. I've got some of my historical. I know, based on my sales historical numbers or pipeline, or however you think about your revenue coming into a new year, I know where I expect to be. Where are you going to get me for the budget you're talking about? Because a lot of sales marketing people are like, hey, well, if you spend an extra 5 a month or 10 a month, K, 5,000, 10,000 a month, here's what we're going to do for you. It's like, hey, that's cool. What am I going to get? Like, what is going to happen to my numbers? You see that I've projected I'm going to be at 1.1 this year, 1.2 this year, whatever that number is. Where should I expect it to go? And you're going to have me bumping up my percentage from my historical number to this. And so you can very quickly, with your simple profit formula, forecast what that's going to do to your bottom line. And if you run it with a minimal amount of growth, if you're kind of your worst case scenario, let's say, and it doesn't make sense, then you probably don't need to spend more. You need to look at other areas of your business to thin out, or you need to get with a sales and marketing person who can more confidently drive that revenue.
Mm-hmm. So you have milestones in place to say, all right, by this time we want to have seen this kind of impact. By this time we want to see this impact. And then you can adjust a lot quicker if things aren't going the way that you want it to.
Exactly. So that's the beauty of the simple profit formula. Again, everything in life is more challenging to execute on. By no means are we saying, hey, you plug it in the formula and it just happens. But the beauty is this. Yeah, exactly. If only. But when you do this, it gives you insight into what if I was able to hold my profit fit.
Ooh.
overhead
Break it.
and my labor fixed, and I'm able to current team. Uh-oh, am I back?
We're losing one. Oh, you're back. Hello. It's a sign. I think it's a.
Okay, I'm back. So sorry. Hey, this helps you do some of the forecasting.
Yep. Colin's laughing. I know you keep breaking up. I think, yeah. So, I mean, what you're saying is it helps you validate if the decision you want to make is the right one. You can see what that impact will be. You can play around in these numbers as much as you want. If anyone wants this tool, we can jazz it up a little bit because this was just our simple profit formula. But if you want this tool, comment the formula tool and down below, and we'll send it off to you because it's huge. It's a big, like, mind opener for what is possible. Colin, you don't look like you're frozen anymore if you want to add something.
No, I'm not frozen. I'm here, but I'm nervous that it's not going to last. No, to your point, if anybody comments, they want this tool, they want to have a conversation about it, they have questions about it, we're always happy to help. It's, part of what we do. But yes, I think get yourself this tool or a tool like it, understand your business on the back of a napkin. It will change your life.
Yeah. Oh, good stuff today. I love these conversations. I feel like you can tell if you're watching that these are the things that pump us up. And we'll have more. So every Wednesday at 2 p.m., we'll come back for another topic. If you have a suggestion of what that topic should be, let us know. Do a post in the Facebook group. We would love that. If you want that tool, comment below and we'll send it out. Otherwise, we will see you next week. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Bye.
Bye.